Well, welcome all. The clock has formally struck here in Chicago, and we are thrilled to have you for our Leadership and Society information session. We are thrilled to welcome you to our gorgeous university virtually here with some of our fall colors, even though I know it is winter and there is snow on the ground here. We're going to start with a welcome, as you can see on the screen, and then we're going to give you a snapshot of the program. We'll go through the learning journey. We'll talk about the selection process, and then we'll answer your questions. And on the screen right now are the four people you'll hear from. I'm Seth Green. I'm the dean here at the University of Chicago Graham School, and we are thrilled to be the executive sponsor of what is a university-wide initiative. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Diana Petty, who can share about herself, and then we'll turn it over to our two fellows. Diana, who are you?
Thank you, Seth, and thank you to all for being with us. It's such a joy. I'm Diana Petty. I have the extraordinary privilege of being the director of the Leadership and Society Initiative. I've been at the university just about 7 years now, but the lion's share of my career I actually spent in and around city government in New York. So I was doing public-private partnership building and civic tech initiatives, and then a stint of capacity building with mission-driven nonprofits. But the through line for me in that period in the civic sector was leadership development. And I was working with up and coming kind of emergent leaders who were really thinking intentionally and purposefully about how they could optimize impact in the communities that they were serving and how to improve quality of life issues across the board. And so when I saw this opportunity to work with leaders, arguably who are at the peak of their wisdom, but asking themselves those same questions. How can they be intentional? How can they activate their extraordinary expertise and talents in service of greater good? I jumped at it and I pinch myself every day that I get to be partners with these incredible individuals on their journeys into next chapters of purpose. So that's a bit about me and looking forward to the conversation today.
Great. And I've added to the screen our advanced fellow at the Leadership and Society Initiative, Laura Dunn. Laura, can you share a little bit about your background, how you came to LSI, and then what you're currently doing at the initiative?
Sure. So my background has been primarily in corporate finance and public companies, CFO stuff, M&A stuff. Um, and I decided about 3.5 years ago that I really wanted to move into something that was more socially oriented. And I fully intended to kind of leverage my connections here in Chicago to pursue that. I've been active in the philanthropic and civic community here for decades. And I still don't know how, but I was invited to a symposium. And Diana, I remember you were pregnant with your 3-year-old son at that time. And I was appropriately seduced by the curriculum of this brand new program. And the opportunity to take any class I wanted at University of Chicago was particularly intriguing to me. My issue that I wanted to address in a very broad way at that time, and I still think it's an issue today, was the polarization in our political climate. And I wanted to do something around democracy reform. I had no idea what that was or whether a person with my business background would add any value, but I thought this would be an interesting structured approach at a renowned university to help me discern that, figure out what I was going to do. So I did the fellowship and I ended up focusing very broadly at democracy reform. And I ended up through a lot of discernment and both academic, but primarily really talking to folks in the space to move into election reform. And that's what I've been focused on.
And our final guest, Liz. Liz is a current fellow in the first year. Liz, do you want to share about you?
Sure. Thank you, Seth. Yeah, this is month 4, actually month 4, week 2, I suppose. So I had a long career at Accenture, and I actually recognized somebody on the phone who worked with me there. So hello. And I retired about 7 years ago and went into what I would call more of a portfolio career I taught at the University of Washington, and also I'm on some boards. And in the last year, maybe even more, two things happened. One is, I just never really felt that that was particularly fulfilling, given all the issues that are out there in the world. And then secondly, I have 9 years teaching at the University of Washington undergrads at the Foster School. And I noticed that thinking about the good of the United States was somewhat eroding, and just some of the comments they would make and discussions I would have. And I was like, this can't be right. And I just started thinking, I've got a lot of capacity, I've got time, talent, and treasure, and I need to figure out a better way to give that back. Right. And I'd been searching for a way to do that. Didn't find that in the portfolio career, heard about LSI. And I'd also had heard about other programs as well. And I looked at the curriculum and thought it would just, sort of be a perfect structure for me to try and sort out and discern sort of what I want to do next. So I came thinking about national public service as an issue. And as I said, I'm only 4 months, well, 3.5 months in, working through how that's going to, how that's going to manifest for me.
Great. Well, we'll come back to each of you throughout the information session, so stay tuned. I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to give everyone here just the quickest overview, apologies, there we go, of this program, and then come back and hear Liz and Laura talk about their experience and Diana talk about the strategy behind it all. So you probably know this if you're in our virtual room. This is a program to support distinguished leaders like Liz and Laura who want to design meaningful next chapters. And the origin of this is that people are living longer. And we realized a lot of people have a whole chapter of adulthood now where they can be purposeful leaders. And they may, because of the dynamism of the world that we're living in, even though they're very accomplished, need new skills to be able to fully activate that leadership. And what we saw was that there were many issues that were complex in nature where this type of executive leader could have really valuable impact in moving systems forward if they had a partner to really expand horizons and to build new networks so that they can take that accomplishment and apply it in a way that would really solve these big challenges. And you've heard Laura and Liz both describe that motivation to use this incredible talent and treasure that they've developed to make a big difference on issues that they care about. So that's the why behind LSI. We want to support individuals. We want you to feel like you're living your purpose in this chapter of life. And even more from a university perspective, we want our intellectual assets to help activate a really important leadership force for society. And where this ends, because I think it's sometimes helpful to just say, okay, so what's the outcome? And then we're going to draw back on the journey to get there in the next section, is with a purpose plan. Really your roadmap for what you want to do to apply your talents on an issue that you care about in a meaningful and actionable way to make the world a better place. And that purpose plan has 3 parts. We often refer to it as the why, your vision, mission, and values. The how, right? What does analysis say about how you would make a difference on that issue that you care about? And then the what specific roles, whether it's board leadership, whether it is starting a new organization, whether it's strategic philanthropy, whether it's actually moving into another career, but maybe changing the field that you're in so that you can use your talents in a directed way that helps you to achieve an additional sense of purpose in your life and career. And I'll just say that the most meaningful part of this program, based on all of the surveys that we've done to date, is actually not our faculty, even though they're amazing, and not just the place, even though we believe passionately in our Nobel Prize winning university. It's the people. It turns out that the #1 value that people found in our first cohort was one another, that going through a moment like this of discovering that next chapter of purpose with 20 plus others who are similarly accomplished and similarly passionate about using their gifts to make the world a better place, that is a deeply meaningful part. And so with that, I'm going to take down my screen again, because I want to come back to our panel. And Diana, maybe I can start with you, because I think it's worth just talking about how do you think about the cohort composition? And then I want to come to Laura and Liz to talk about what the cohort has meant to their experience. But Diana, who's in the cohort? How do you think about developing it to really build out the best working group for these executives to envision their next chapters?
Yeah, so as Seth is saying, our hypothesis, and we have seen this play out in our 2 cohorts so far, is that the cohort itself is an accelerant for each individual fellow's learning process. And so there's kind of three qualities we think that unify this group of leaders. The first is that they are at some form of inflection point in their lives. Those inflection points look very different. There's no kind of cookie cutter mold, but that they're thinking meaningfully about some kind of change, some kind of transition. The second, as Seth mentioned, is that they are motivated by issues in the world and looking for opportunities to contribute their capabilities in service of issues that they're passionate about. And the final is that they're intellectually curious, right? They would come into a learning environment like this, a Nobel Prize winning institution, because they're eager to gain new perspectives, new knowledge, and absorb new approaches that might, be applicable for them as they move forward. All of that said, I think they are distinct and unique and diverse in every other dimension than those three things I just shared. We think very deeply about varied forms of leadership, whether that's by sector or industry, whether that's by geography, other types of lived experience, because we see diversity of point of view, of not only historic point of view, but also vision for what comes next as the building blocks for the most transformational ideas and breakthrough new ways of thinking. So in each class, we had 20 in the inaugural cohort, we have 22 in this active class. There is such a range, and the split roughly is about 60% come from the private sector. So real estate, finance, media and advertising, large scale law. But then we have about 40% who come from the civic sector, very broadly defined. So we've had folks who have been in large scale nonprofits, in philanthropy and foundation spaces, but we also have practicing physicians and architects and academics who are thinking about how can they apply their scholarly expertise in more applied and direct ways moving forward. So it really is an extraordinary, and I think Laura and Liz can speak to this more. They can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're consistently around the table of leaders and experience and wisdom that is kind of unlike any environment you really get to frequently engage with elsewhere. So it is very unique and special, and we think very thoughtfully about how we can bring that diversity to bear for the benefit of every individual's learning process.
Well, so that's the theory behind what we're aiming toward. Laura and Liz, let's talk about what it means in practice. Liz, can we start with you?
Sure.
How has the cohort been meaningful to you, and what difference has it made to be on this journey with others?
Well, I kind of knew that I'd end up getting close to some people, but I didn't realize I'd have like 21 new best friends at this point in my life. And they literally have become like my new best friends. Like we get together on the weekends and the evenings and all kinds of things, and their families. And it's just been wonderful to get to know them. And Diana is right about the diversity of the cohort. And what surprised me more than anything is the diversity of backgrounds. Like we have a rabbi and a surgeon in our class, and it has just been fantastic to get their opinions. Especially I kind of thought it would be more people like me, people coming out of more of a corporate kind of job. And it's just been wonderful to have that sort of mix. So then the thing that they've done more than anything else is challenge my thinking, right? Because I've been used to sitting around with the same kind of people. And for years, like 30 something plus years, where we all agreed about how things, how business would run, sort of how society looks, et cetera. And oh boy, I don't get the benefit or the sort of, I don't get to use that anymore. I got to listen to my cohort, take in their ideas, and much of my thinking has changed. And it's just been fantastic.
Laura, can we come to you? And you're now, far into the meaning of a cohort, because your cohort has been now 15 months into formation.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo a lot of what Liz said. I think what was really interesting for me is that within a relatively short period of time, a month or two, you forget what people are and you get to learn more who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really digging deep into values and purpose. And it's just such a gift to be surrounded by folks who are similarly wanting to lead a very purposeful life, but come to it from very different perspectives. I found as I moved through the program, even if somebody came from an entirely different background and were pursuing a purpose plan that was 180 degrees different than what I was, we were still on the same journey, and we learned so much from each other moving through that. And that was very rewarding. And I can tell you after our cohort, our classes ended in May, we're still very close. I agree. I have 19 new best friends, and I just so value the relationships that we developed during the course of the fellowship.
And I'll just echo, Laura, something you said that is also on strategy for us, which is that you get to know people beyond their backgrounds and really who they are. And it's something David Brooks talks a lot about in his course that, one of the challenges of having great accomplishment, it's an asset. It's also a burden, especially sometimes at this stage of life where you may be beyond that moment, and really being able to let go of some of that in this cohort and really get to know each other for who one another is really a great asset as you enter a new chapter, and you still take great value and stock of what you've done, but you also at the same time let go of aspects of it that allow you to travel lightly and engage the future. So I just think it's a great example. It's something that we talked a lot about with David, with Harry, with some others as we were imagining, and I'm delighted to hear that that actually has been felt in the cohort in terms of the experience. Let me just come back, Laura and Liz, to each of you. We talked about the purpose plan being the end here. This is a very challenging ask because I know you're working on complex issues. Can you give the elevator story of what you're working on for your purpose plans? Laura, maybe you've had a little bit more time. We'll start with you. And then Liz, I know yours is still in development, but we'll hear about what you're developing. Laura?
Well, I think, what you have to embrace is that it's a process. And, overall, as you move through kind of moving into a different chapter of your life, there's a psychological shift you're making from, being a leader in a large organization, which was me, into kind of academic world and then self-directed. So all of that is kind of played into, where I landed in my purpose plan in May versus where I am now. So over the course of my fellowship last school year, I think I mentioned I started with a very wide aperture of doing something around democracy reform. And I kind of looked at, what are the issues that appear to be, problematic in our U.S. democracy, and then what are some of the solutions? And I narrowed it down to solutions that I felt I could add value and get traction on over the next 10 to 15 years. So that was, and that I felt my business expertise would help elevate and advance. So I landed on election reform, open primaries, ranked choice voting, things like that. And what I wanted to do was really see if I could bring the business community into this movement, because I felt as a person who had constructed corporate risk management infrastructures that political risk has become a bigger and bigger issue in business in general, and business is really sitting on the sidelines with it. And I felt the structural reform around election reform is a way to mitigate some of that risk and ultimately drive less extreme candidates and more centrist candidates who can actually, legislate and get good regulations out there. Since May, as you all know, we had a big election. There were a number of ballot initiatives on election reform, many of which didn't pass. And it caused me to kind of sit and think about, okay, is this the right time to go to the business community and try to enroll them in this when they're looking at a new administration with tariffs, new tax law, new regulations? And I just kind of thought, they're not going to have a lot of listening in the moment. And I spent some time kind of analyzing and working with others on after action reviews of what was going on in the election reform movement. And I kind of saw from a business lens, there were two things that needed to help advance the movement. One is there are literally hundreds of organizations involved in this movement, many at a very straight grassroots level. And I felt there was an opportunity to set up a shared service model similar to what you see in PE companies of really providing the resources these organizations need to run their nonprofits in a variety of ways. And then the other area of interest, and I'm actually writing grants, planning grants for each of these ideas right now and looking for funding. My other idea is to do some real fundamental consumer research. I spent some time in my career doing branding work and consumer research, and the type of research that's done in the political environment is very campaign and candidate specific. I'm not sure there's ever been research done that fundamentally looks at what U.S. citizens think about democracy. How engaged are they in it? What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? And I'd really like to do that kind of work that I've successfully done in the private sector and take it into this sector and really see at this important crossroads of our democracy how people feel about it. So I'm actively working on those 2 grant proposals right now, and I'll start pitching them to some large funders very soon. But that's where I am. That's why I say this is kind of a process.
Yeah.
I'm still in the same space, but I'm thinking, how do I take my talents to really help this movement in a way that could be effective?
Well, I just want to highlight a few things, Laura, about your example, because it's spot on for what we're aiming to do, which is whatever your views and wherever you want to make a difference. And we, as the University of Chicago, we believe that we are a sponsor of critics and not a critic ourselves. So we love people being on all sides of all issues. And what we want to do is we want to give you the tools to be as rigorous about achieving your purpose as possible. And I think what you've just described is you had this idea. You came and sat with a lot of scholars. You were able to do a lot of deep thinking, and then you've been able to pivot over time. And you're being very data driven about what's happening in the world. What are you trying to achieve? Where is there an opportunity? And in many ways, you're using the core business skills that you've had that have made you so successful for decades in the corporate sphere. But now you're adding all of this acumen around societal issues and new networks, and the combination, I believe, is going to be very enabling for you to achieve the vision that you have. Liz, can we get your quicker snapshot? Because I know you're just months in and you
Yeah, and I was just listening to Laura on the democracy point, because mine is similar, which is, again, going back to national public service. As I said, I've seen a shift in over the 9 years I taught at UW in terms of young people's sort of engagement and thinking about whether or not, the US is a good place to live or not. And I keep thinking, well, it's done pretty well for me. And so I think public service would be a good idea for youth, either military or AmeriCorps. And so I'm working to figure out, is there a way to expand that? Only 1% of our youth go into the military and 0.1% go into public service in the form of AmeriCorps. There's more demand actually at this point than there is supply for public service spots through AmeriCorps. And so the question is, how do I change that? And the first thing I'm doing, similar to Laura, is I want to figure out is that if more youth did do it, would they feel more engaged in the United States? Would that make a change, et cetera? So Laura, I'm going to call you offline because your research sounds really interesting. And then the second part is I need to understand, what all the programs are that are out there. And then most importantly, I need to figure out what's my role going to be in all that, right? So, and I don't know yet. And everybody keeps asking me, are you going to run an organization? And the answer is no. And I don't need to know right now, right? Because what I'm trying to do is figure out what the landscape is, where's the white space, and then narrow in where I can best apply my time, talent, and treasure to the issue.
So, Diana, I want to come to you before we go back to the slides, talk about the learning journey. We've heard about 2 purpose plans. These are, in my own view, and you see them much more closely, 2 examples of people that are really hitting on this societal impact and very driven, in this case, actually, by what is an almost shared set of topics. Can you just talk about the broad spectrum of purpose plans and what that looks like across the cohorts?
Yes. So, as everyone has shared so far, we do have a societal impact orientation to the program. That's part of our mission. But we are very intentionally not prescriptive about what that impact could be. And in fact, to all the points already made, our primary goal is to help our fellows create alignment across their unique and individualized values, areas of expertise and superpowers, and where they can find those opportunities to contribute to an issue they care about, and kind of bringing those 3 things into alignment with each other. And, from last year's class, we really saw a continuum develop, and we're seeing it start to unfold in this year's cohort as well. And they were bookended by kind of 2 visions for next chapters of purpose that we roughly labeled an outside-in approach and an inside-out approach. And what I mean by that is, we had some fellows leave their 9 months last year just very energized and animated by an issue area. I mean, it ran the gamut: democracy reform, election reform, food insecurity, violence prevention, reform of literacy, how we teach literacy in K through 12 schools. You name it, there really was a very wide array. And they kind of left, their realizations were, wow, I have a lot to offer. And if I can figure out a way, even in the smallest, littlest, most incremental change, to offer something in that area, I'm going to derive a sense of purpose and fulfillment and enrichment that's going to be really purposeful and meaningful to me. On the other end of that spectrum, we had other fellows leave with learnings that were a little bit more about how they could invest in themselves and their continued growth at this stage, their wellness, their meaningful relationships, and how they could bring their wisdom out in new and different ways. And so those folks were thinking, if I make those investments, if I figure out how to translate what I've learned in intentional ways, I will then proceed to be the most impactful leader that I possibly can be. So those folks are doing writing and teaching, they're mentoring up and coming leaders. And then we saw people have everything in between. So it's not mutually exclusive, but that was just kind of the range of orientations that we saw. And it makes perfect sense because everyone comes in with a very unique and distinct view, both, entering, but how they're imagining leaving as well. And I will say that just tactically speaking, because I think it was also interesting, logistically, there were kind of 4 archetypes, to Liz's point about like what actually were people stepping into that we saw emerge. The first was people who looked for full-time roles. The second was people who thought about launching or building or developing something new. The third was a portfolio life, but really having some confidence and clarity about how they could make different elements of their portfolio greater than the sum of its parts. And the final, and I've never arrived at a good label for this group, but they were important and vocal and significant, but were people who were kind of on a continued journey and really were continuing to invest in themselves, their learning, their connections, not knowing exactly where the destination was. And that was an intentional choice on their parts. And again, was a part of kind of cultivating their energy and activating their leadership and purposefulness. So that's a bit of the array of what we saw develop.
Well, I'm going to come back to all of you again soon, but let me just talk a little bit at a high level about the learning journey. And then I'm going to ask about your experience in it, Liz and Laura and Diana, how you've thought about it as executive director. You may have seen this for those who had a chance to review some of the materials on the website. We have a 3-part learning journey, which is how we see the curriculum really building over the course of the academic year. And part 1, going the wrong direction there, part 1 is know oneself. So this is really about how do you think about your values and purpose? And we wanted to be very intentional about using the liberal arts, which the university is really committed to, as the foundation. And so you read texts across time and space about how people have thought about their value, their legacy, and what they are leaving. And David Brooks, who's a faculty member in this, often talks about moving from the resume values to what might be a little bit dark, the eulogy values, and just thinking about, what do you want to occur in this next chapter that would allow you to feel like you've lived a really meaningful life? And our belief is that some of that is self-reflection on your own life. And we do that with an incredible member of the Booth faculty who does a lot of this with executives. But then that course is actually paired with someone who is a classicist and who is reading world wisdom literature to really think about how have the ancients answered some of these questions. And we think both looking within, but also looking across time and space is a great way to begin thinking about who are you. And for many people, because their career has been so significant, these are questions that look different as they may be coming toward an inflection point than they may have even 5 or 10 years earlier. The second is understand the world. And to Laura's point earlier, like being in a world where you're being questioned by peers who may be coming from different lenses, that is something we've actually tried to also build into the curriculum. And so what understand the world is about is actually giving you different lenses. So we'll take the same issue and then we'll look, how would an economist think about this issue? How would a sociologist think about this issue? How would a policymaker think about this issue? And as you might not be surprised, they may think about these issues very differently. And being the University of Chicago, we love to platform people who disagree. And so on the issue, for example, of crime, the head of our crime lab here is an economist, and he may have a very strong view about, if we prosecute more, here's the data. well, this is going to lead to a deterrent and this is going to lead to less crime. And then we have a sociologist here who won a MacArthur Genius Award, who's done qualitative research and really looked at some of the vicious cycles that happen. And as you may already suspect, we do not have answers at the University of Chicago. We have questions and we have lenses, and then we let you come up with your answers. And so the goal here is to help you with fluency in these different lenses. And in truth, it is not that common that someone comes and says, oh, I've been a business leader and thought from an economics lens my entire life. Now I'm suddenly going to change. Instead, what it does is when you're working on these issues, you're often working with people from lots of different lenses. Instead of walking into a room and being like, well, how do they see it this way when, here's the answer. I know this is the answer because this is, what my thinking and my success would tell me. You begin to develop an understanding of all these other lenses. And so you may largely keep a lens that you've had, but now your ability to collaborate and work with and move the needle on issues you care about may be greater because you have this greater fluency and understanding of other lenses and can find the middle of Venn diagrams between yours and others in a much more successful way. The final piece of this is envisioning the future. And this is actually taught by practitioners who, for example, are leaders at executive search firms that can talk about board governance and CEO transition, who are leaders in areas like strategic philanthropy and impact investing, which a lot of people might have as part of how they achieve their goals at this stage of life. And then there are specific opportunities for people who may want to start an organization or be involved in a career search to get very specialized resources through what are called next chapter advisors. So that is the learning journey. And I'll just show on this next slide that then becomes the 3 courses, which we call frameworks for reflection, lenses for investigation, and pathways to impact in the curriculum. And alongside that core curriculum, there are a number of other pieces that allow you to really specialize in your learning journey. The greatest of which is that there are 3 courses that are by cohort, and then 2 that you take by audit anywhere that interests you. So Liz and Laura, I'm guessing, have taken a number of courses that relate to democracy and political science. There are other people that are interested, as Diana mentioned, in childhood development. They're in the psychology department or potentially with the biological sciences looking at neuroscience. There are people that are really interested in having the economy grow faster and how the US, overcomes its debt, and they're taking classes at Booth. So you get to really specialize and get the latest and a deeper understanding and often partner with those faculty themselves in that purpose that you're driving toward. There are immersion days where we go deep into a specific topic and we actually bring practitioners from around the world together with you to look at that. We have travel study each year where you go for a week to an international destination to look at these issues. Last year was London and it was sustainable urbanism. This year is Paris. And the question is, they're living about 6 years longer than the US, spending about half on healthcare. What can we learn about longevity and aging effectively from a European example? And where might we have some things to teach? And then there's a partnership with the Aspen Institute, which has been a vital partner since the beginning of this initiative. And they run a workshop around values, purpose, and leadership. They do this at Aspen, and we've asked them to tailor this because it's so meaningful for people in that early development of that know oneself. And so it's a 3-day executive seminar that you go through as a cohort early in the process. And then alongside those curricular resources, we have co-curricular 3 next chapter advisors, an executive coach that is helping you to really think about how do you develop the specific tools to accomplish what you want next. For example, a board biography or a CV that really helps you to explain why this would be a natural transition for you, for example, from the private sector toward leadership in another field or sector. An academic advisor who on that societal issue, you heard Laura really give a lot of deep explanation. I know her advisor is Heidi Heitkamp, who's a former senator and the leader of our Institute of Politics. And then a distinguished mentor, that's someone that's really helping you to think about how to think 5 to 10 years out because they've done it and build out that next chapter. And I believe, Liz, yours might be Barbara Stewart, who is the former CEO of AmeriCorps. And so as you're looking at this topic, who better than someone who has led at the highest levels of the Corporation for National and Community Service? So that is the journey. It ends in the purpose plan that we talked about earlier. And as Diana mentioned, that purpose plan can bring people across this outside in and inside out journey. But you are not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from the experts. So let me take down my screen again. And if I can start, Laura and Liz, with both of you, you're incredibly accomplished. You are in that stage where you're thinking about what next. Was it a little bit interesting to go back to the university classroom? Can you just talk a little bit about, decades away potentially from at least being in school on the student side? I know, Liz, you were teaching in a university, but yeah, just talk a little bit about what is it like to go back to class? How were the cohort-based and audit-based classes? And give us a little bit of color on that experience. Laura, can we start with you?
Sure. So the cohort-based classes were great because first of all, we had just amazing faculty, amazing my favorite type of classes would be, I'm thinking of, David Ray's class on wisdom and philosophy, where we'd be reading some pretty intense texts. They might be Hindu texts or Chinese philosophy. And we come into class and he'd spend maybe a third of the class explaining the text we just read and giving context. He was even writing Sanskrit, like he was an amazing faculty member. And then we'd spend 2/3 of the class talking about what it meant, like very open-ended conversations. And what did it mean to us? And what do you think they were doing with it and why? And those were fascinating. Going to the audit classes were really fun too. The quality of the student body is amazing. I mean, they're brilliant bunch of kids. And, so that's a little bit intimidating, but, oftentimes I'd find, I took a lot of seminar classes, which were also a lot of intense reading, but a lot of great discussion. And they would approach the problems very analytically, like intellectually, where, you kind of bring your life experience and common sense, and you kind of can see right through the forest in a way that they can't. But I made a lot of great friends among the students I was in classes with. I always took advantage of the breaks to chat with them and talk about what they're doing and what they hope to do on graduation, what their thesis is on. And it was just a really delightful opportunity to see how, undergrad and graduate students are thinking about their education, where they're going with it. So, but plus, just the opportunity to really dig deeper. I did take a lot of classes in democracy and political science and philosophy, and they were just fun. It was just fun to be able to dive into that stuff in a way that as an audit, you don't have a pressure of writing a paper and studying for an exam like I did when I was an undergrad, and I don't think I really understood or enjoyed it as much as I did today.
Liz, can you talk to the classroom experience, and then maybe I'll add the next question just into it for time's sake, which is, your next chapter advisors as well. So a little bit on the
Yeah.
then your
So
next.
I'd echo everything Laura had to say. One of my cohort said to me, like we were driving in one morning, like this is probably a month in, and he said, education is wasted on the young, because we were all enjoying it so much. Like, remember when you're in undergraduate school, it's sort of like you're just trying to get through it. And here every day is sort of like, I just think it's a gift, like David Ray's class, as Laura said. And I've never used the word Aristotelian before, and now I use it. So it's just been fantastic. And I was an engineering major. So most of actually everything that we've talked about so far and everything that we've read, I never had an opportunity to read in high school or college. So it's all new to me. The reading is a lot. I mean, it took a while to kind of get into the rhythm of the whole thing, but now that it's the second quarter, it's much easier. And all the professors are fantastic. In terms of the next chapter advisor, as Seth, as you mentioned, I have Barbara Stewart, who is the CEO of AmeriCorps, so I can't ask for a better mentor. I also have a terrific coach. I'm currently working on finding an academic advisor, but there's also, I mean, there's so many other people at the university who I've been able to reach out to get help from. So it's sort of, if there's a will, there's a way, through Seth and Diana, in terms of finding people to help you. And the university is just unbelievably well connected.
Diana, can I come to you because you have been in charge of all of the elements of this curriculum? What do you see as the greatest strengths of the experience as you think about beyond the cohort itself, the learning journey?
Yeah, there's maybe a few things I would emphasize. The first at the highest level is that, every part of the LSI learning experience is built around these three learning pillars: knowing yourself, understanding the world, and envisioning the future. And every different moving part rolls up into those three pillars in some meaningful way. And I think what we found is that like trifecta is effective for supporting people and moving through a really intentional discernment process and coming out the other side with some new clarity, some new confidence about where they're headed in this next stage of their lives. That's part one. But within that, I would say another sweet spot we've found is that the curriculum is also designed to harmonize a shared learning journey and opportunity for individualization. So, as Liz and Laura were mentioning, the shared learning journey is very liberal arts in nature. It's very multidisciplinary. It's intended to be provocative, but also help fellows build a very dynamic, multifaceted toolkit for, kind of pulling on different things that they might dial up or dial back in their leadership at this next stage. But that shared learning journey is not only valuable for each fellow, but it creates the basis for really rich, robust exchanges and peer learning processes as well. But then, as you're hearing, everybody is gravitating in different directions and kind of wants to focus their energy and their time on different priorities. And so that's where the audits come in. That's where the next chapter guides come in, who are really kind of tailoring to what it is that, each fellow is looking to learn and their goals for the experience. And then finally, I will say that I think we endeavor to also harmonize in the curriculum a blend of philosophical and practical. And I think like having both of those things as part of this, we've seen be really valuable because, again, leaders who come into LSI are doers. They're extremely capable at moving things forward, at being decisive, and it's made them very, very successful and distinguished. So being able to tap into and activate that momentum and that drive and giving really applied and experiential opportunities is important and critical. But then as you're hearing Laura and Liz reflect on some of the classes that were the most interesting and intriguing to widen the aperture, it was these kind of humanistic inquiry, areas that are much more theoretical, much more kind of intellectually stimulating, because that's where a lot of the kind of new, wiring and thinking differently and stepping outside of normal, well-trodden paths can occur. And so trying to bring those two things to work together is the other part that we focus on, and I think we've seen bear fruit.
Well, I'm going to show my screen for just another 2 minutes because we want to have at least 15 minutes for Q&A, and we have some questions that we'll get to right away. But if you have other questions, please chat them in. I just want to talk through the selection process. We are looking for people that are more than 2 decades of senior level experience. They have a track record both of accomplishment and a real commitment to society. And then something that is true for every single program at the University of Chicago: we want you to be willing to engage in deep, rigorous, and respectful open exchange. This is a place that wants to challenge viewpoints, wants to engage controversial thinking, and wants to do so in the spirit of joint inquiry being the best way to learn new knowledge. And so that's something that is core as a matter of every part of the university, and we're very proud to be a partner in that free expression culture. The process for being part of the LSI Fellowship is the first step. You just submit your existing resume or professional biography. And that's because we really wanted people to be able to know, are they truly eligible? And so that process allows you to know that you're eligible before the second step, which does require quite a bit of time and discernment. It is a number of essay questions. I know it's been a while since many of you have written these types of essays. And the reason it's so essential to us is because we said the number one value we create with this program is the cohort. So we are exceedingly mindful of building a cohort where people are really thinking deeply about this next chapter, and they're excited to contribute to each other's next chapters. And then we solidify our understanding of that topic in the interview that is step 3. I will say that this is a program that we have worked very hard to ensure is accessible. The way that we do that is there is a tuition at the level that is consistent with a University of Chicago graduate level education, but then we do have scholarship, and that especially is likely to go to people who may have found eminence in the social or civic sectors, and that eminence didn't come with the same financial opportunity. And so we are excited to work with you if you decide to apply and go through the process to ensure that this is as accessible as possible so that we can have the most successful cohort possible. And with that, we're going to open to questions. I will take down my screen. And let me just start with some of the questions that are in this chat. The first question is, how long is the program and how much is in-person versus virtual? Diana, let me come to you on that question to just give the kind of, the details, logistics outline of the program.
Yeah, so the fellowship is 9 months, September to May, which is one academic year here at the university. And it is in person. And I will say we were launching post-pandemic where the precedent for hybrid was strong. We did a lot of focus grouping, a lot of invitation of feedback on whether to do in person or hybrid. And where we landed, to some of the points said earlier, is to stick with in person for two primary reasons. One is that the value of the cohort, there's just no substitute for the community building, the trust, the bonds that can develop when you are really immersed together in this experience. And we wanted to prioritize that. But secondarily, as Liz and Laura have tapped in so successfully, there are so many assets of the university. This is such a treasure trove of opportunities and relationships and connections and expertise that are really, it's a gateway when you are here. And that was the most optimal way that we could make that available to our fellows. We do, however, in those 9 months, the in-person programming is isolated each week, Monday to Wednesday. That's when all the core classes happen. Any programming we do exclusively for LSI is those days of the week. And so we intentionally leave Thursdays and Fridays much more flexible because we know the type of leader who comes into LSI has other outside meaningful commitments, whether that is leadership capacities or they want to spend time with their families and their grandchildren, and that's a priority for them at this stage as well. So we've tried to kind of make sure that the in-person immersion really is as robust and transformational as it could be, while still creating a degree of freedom and flexibility to honor outside obligations.
And then I'll just call before we go to other questions. There's another question in the chat noticing that many people that are current fellows have a former associated with their titles. And that is because the nature of being in person in Chicago and having about a 20 to 30 hour a week commitment during the 30 weeks of the academic year means it's very hard to have at least the type of executive roles that people are in before they come into LSI. That said, as Diana previews here in the chat, early next month, you will hear from us that there is going to be a second pathway, and we'll have all the information up about it, and you'll receive that update as a member of the listserv. And that will be for the many people who have the current in their title and don't want to reach the cliff before they've planned for it, and they would rather have an off-ramp than a cliff ending. And so we've heard that message loud and clear from the day we began, that people said, this is exactly the journey I want. There is no chance I could be in Chicago embedded in this way. Is there a chance that we could get these tools in a format that allowed me to still have my full-time work? So to look out for those who may be in that camp. We would love to have both a group of people that are at that inflection point, which is the current model, and people that are nearing and want to plan in advance of it. I am just going to go to the next question in the chat here. Can you talk a little bit, Diana, and then I want to come to Laura and Liz, just about the geographic mix of participants. It's majority from the rest of the country, but we do have a significant group from Chicago, many of whom have actually worked and lived across the world, but have now put their residence down here. But I don't know if you want to talk at all about the national global mix.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. I would say the majority of the cohort have lived in many parts of the country and many parts of the world. But at the point of LSI, about 60% of them hail from outside the Chicago region, and 40% are sort of in and around, and that we sort of include Milwaukee and Indiana in that rough percentage as well. And so the folks who are coming from outside, the majority of them relocate. We support them in connecting to housing, but they relocate to Chicago for this kind of sabbatical style year, the strategic pause they're taking to really reflect on this next chapter and what it could look like and give it some shape. And so we've had folks live in Hyde Park when they relocated. We had some live in the South Loop, if you know the city, which is just a short drive north, but more in the center of Chicago. Um, and I think that mix has been really meaningful. Again, not only, so it's worth taking a step back and saying a lot of our curriculum does focus on Chicago for a few reasons, because the university has really deep and meaningful relationships with social impact leaders across the city that we can learn from and we want to connect our fellows to. Because Chicago is also a very well-studied city. So there, when we're looking at cases, when we're looking at different issue areas, there's a lot of evidence to pull from. There's a lot of opportunity to learn from analysis here. And because Chicago is complex and it is dealing in a very continuous way with very prominent and present social, economic, and environmental needs. And so having people who are tapped into some of those issues locally, while then being able to compare and contrast to people's experiences in other major metropolitan areas or other, parts of the country and world, has been incredible. But I look at both Laura and Liz, who have organized. It's been wonderful to have people with home bases in Chicago, because they become a backbone of social outings, and they know the best restaurants or the best places for music. They invite people to their homes, and that really has been a very, I think, special part of all being here and being immersed and embedded.
Yeah, and so
Yeah,
can
I
you
mean,
talk?
I would
Go for it,
I
Laura.
would highlight the social piece. Like, I think I don't know, Liz, if you guys are doing this, but every Wednesday night we'd go drinking at Jimmy's after class. I was, about once every 3 or 4 weeks, I'd do an event at my house, or whoever was in town on the weekend would come. But the other reason why I think it's great to be located here, which I live here anyway, but and we haven't really touched on this, there's amazing programming at the university, amazing speakers, panels, like just amazing program, particularly in my space, to be able to tap into the Institute of Politics and just incredible speakers and small group discussions. It is a good reason why you want to be here. Because I got so much value, and I still enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah. And I split time between Seattle and here, and it's worked out really well. So it wasn't ideal to be spending the winter here, I would say, but it's fine. And as Laura said the other night, I was at an Institute of Politics event with Brandon Johnson, and there were probably 100 people there. I mean, and
Wow, he got that many.
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So it was really good. It was really good. Very the students ask them questions, and it's always fun to listen to what the students have to say for these speakers.
Yep.
We have one more question that I got privately in the chat, for Laura and Liz. I mean, do you think you would have been able to envision these next chapters without LSI?
I'm going to go with I'm going to just say I'm a little too early to call, maybe. Not what I'm doing, not in the rigorous manner that I'm going about it. And I certainly would have never figured out how to connect to Barbara Stewart, my mentor. And as I said, I was thinking about this for a while, and trying to figure it out, and I wasn't able to get to it on my own.
Yeah, I would say no, in the sense that, number one, the curriculum was just amazing discernment and really helped me think more deeply about myself, but also the audit classes helped me think more deeply about democracy. I'm taking a class right now on multiculturalism in liberal democracies. It's amazing, and tangential to the space I'm in, it's going to be very helpful. I think it also, I'm a connector anyway. I always used to tell my staff, if your butt's in one place for decades, you know people. But it opened up a whole new world for me, just leveraging the connections through the university to really learn more about the space I wanted to be in, and also to kind of give me, a good housekeeping seal of approval. Like, people are more willing to talk to you if you're in a program like this and you're pursuing a fellowship in this. And so I think it opened a lot of doors that I might not have been able to open on my own.
Agree.
Well, so we are at the end of our time. Let me just maybe ask each of you a closing thought to people out there that are prospective candidates. Can we start, Diana, with you? Any final remark?
Why did you have to start with me? As I'm just kind of basking in the glow of Laura and Liz. But yeah, I mean, I will say, having been alongside two cohorts, experiencing, I think it's worth mentioning that there is joy here. There is a juxtaposition of like, this is a rigorous institution, this is a rigorous program. These are leaders who are serious about their time, about their opportunities, about their work. And so there is that robustness to it. But part of coming into this does, I think, spark joy in a very unique, a very specific way. I've seen it in both cohorts. And it's funny, we invite alumni of the program back for certain moments, and one of that is the welcome ceremony when we kind of kick off the new cohort. And one member of this current class commented about the inaugural group. When they were all back together, it felt like they were levitating, right? I do that is it is an intangible of this experience and this community and the relationships that form. And I think every person I have watched so far left differently than they began this experience, and that has struck me very deeply. So I'll offer that.
Liz, can we go to you next?
Yeah, one thing I learned this week, we have this class called Practical Wisdom, and we're just talking about all kinds of wisdom and what's the difference between grit and self-control and stuff I've actually never thought about in my whole life, kind of like why, but it's really fascinating. And we study movies and the professor said something that really struck with me, which is, can I get to the same outcome in a different way? And of course, I've heard that before, but I'm sitting there in class, I'm like, thinking about my purpose plan, thinking, well, there might be more ways to get there. And so just to make sure that I'm open to all the options to get to the actual outcome, not just national public service.
Laura, final word?
Yeah, I would just say, when you're moving into a different chapter, there's a whole psychological component. And I was talking to Diane about this over lunch. Like, she thinks I'm crazy busy doing all this stuff. I'm like, I'm at 30%. Like, I'm still adjusting to be in an unstructured environment at 30%. And so kind of moving through this, at least 30% to me. So at least moving through this with other accomplished people, even if we're all different backgrounds doing different things, it's just so much fun. And, when I get together, I had lunch yesterday with two people from my cohort, and, we don't even get a word in edgewise. We're just talking constantly for 2 hours. It's just, there's just so much of a connection that helps you move through it. That I don't think I would have been able to capture in any other way than this unique experience at LSI.
Well, those are beautiful ways to end. Thank you all for being with us. We're really grateful to have you, and we look forward to talking with you should you ultimately decide you want to pursue the fellowship. And Laura and Liz, thank you for being role model fellows. Diana, thank you for being a visionary executive director. I hope everyone has a good afternoon.